Good afternoon, my dear brothers and sisters in Christ Jesus. Let us begin our conference with a scripture reading. A reading from the Gospel according to St. Luke, chapter 10, verses 38 onwards. Now, as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving. And she went up unto him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me. But the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things. But one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. My dear brothers and sisters, we are coming into the second half of our retreat. In the first half, that is for the 5 conferences that we heard earlier, we were trying to identify different obstacles to inner freedom. On the first day, in the first conference, we did how at 4 layers of our life: physical, intellectual, affective, and spiritual, we may have different hurdles towards inner freedom. And in the light of Jesus healing a person at Bethesda, and in the light of other gospel readings, we try to identify how we could come out of those hurdles or how we can overcome those hurdles. Then we saw 4 major obstacles. The number 1 obstacle to inner freedom is duplicity. Duplicity or double dealing or hypocrisy. We reflected on this with the character of a patriarch in the book of Genesis, namely Jacob. Then the second major problem we considered to be a hurdle was, and for that we took the help from David episode. Then the third problem we encountered was vulnerability, or handling our vulnerabilities or our own weaknesses, and we reflected that with the character of Samson. And this morning, anger as an emotion, depression as an emotional state, how they could hurdle our inner freedom, we discussed. So far we have discussed our hurdles to inner freedom. So it's like we are going towards a direction and there are obstacles in the path, and we have just tried to eliminate the obstacles. Now, after eliminating the obstacle, what we have to do? We have to move further. So from now on, we'll be considering, after having obtained inner freedom or after being free in an inner way, how we can reach out to our rootedness and our openness. Rootedness in terms of our space, openness in terms of our time, mission. So we have these 2 characteristics as a person, as a priest, as a religious, or whatever occasion we are in. We all have these 2 elements. We are rooted in a community. We are rooted in a congregation. We are rooted in a diocese. And then we open ourselves to different ministries, maybe like a provincial or as a principal or as a teacher or as a professor or as somebody in charge of the community or in charge of evangelization or healthcare ministry. So in all these possible ways, we try to open ourselves up. So today and tomorrow and the day after, we'll be considering how we can move, means after obtaining inner freedom. And oftentimes inner freedom is a journey, we constantly need to arrive at it. But still, once we are free, we have inner freedom, how we can take that to our mission and our life. So this afternoon that will be starting with the character of Mary of Bethany, inner freedom for rootedness. So this is a little background to the title and the summary. And this is a painting. We might have seen many paintings of this type where Martha, Mary, Jesus are there. And this painting actually is not historical in the sense. If you have been to Holy Land and if you have visited the house of Mary and Martha at Bethany, it's actually in fact, very small house, like 10 feet into 10 feet, and without any. First, here already the steps are inside. There's no duplex type, so it's like a plain house, and like inner room is there, and that's what they show that this is the house of Mary and Martha, but we are not sure. But this painting, if you look at the painting, in a way it summarizes like two types of personality, like Martha type of personality and Mary type. And if you see Martha here, Martha has a jar in her left hand and has a basket of fruits in her right hand. In the sense, she is ready to serve Jesus. And here, if you look at Mary, she's being seated under the feet of Christ and she has nothing in her hands. And her total gaze, that eyes are fixed on Jesus. And if you look at when we analyze an art, they say, like we have to look how the symmetries are, how the proportions are taken. If you analyze, like Jesus is relatively a very big person compared to other two persons. Like even though he is sitting, he is reaching the height of Martha. So that way he is tall. So in a way, the artist wants to show that Jesus is the center of attraction. But if we draw a line here, so like we have a here, and you make a horizontal line. So more or less it cuts across Martha's head, and Martha stands above Jesus. But if we draw a line from here, Mary to here, so more or less Mary's head goes along with Jesus's hand. So here our eyes are connected to Jesus' hand. So this is how the symmetry works here in the painting. Now, the meaning is very simple. Martha stands taller than Jesus. Mary is sitting under Jesus' feet, surrendering herself. So Martha is ready to serve, but Mary is being served. So here, what do we mean by inner freedom for rootedness is this? Like, unless we are served by God, we can't serve other people, which means our rootedness must be such that it is served by God, it is initiated by God, it is created by God, and it is strengthened by God. So once that rootedness is clear, that God dimension is taken care, the other dimension will be taken care easily. But as far as Martha is concerned, she is in a serving position. She wants to serve Jesus. So she is taller than, or she stands taller than Jesus. In a way, she takes precedence over Jesus. That way we can say. So Martha tries to serve and Mary tries to be being served. And look at the feet here. So for when we come to rootedness, the second element that we need to consider here is the feet, because only through our feet we stand on the ground. But according to Kundalini Yoga, they say our root is the spinal cord. So, but they have different interpretation. But as far as the Western understanding is concerned, rootedness is always connected to our feet. If you look here, we have here Jesus's feet here. Jesus' feet is very firm and it's rooted on the floor. And Martha's feet, we are not sure because the painter has removed it or the painter is not interested in it. And look at Mary's feet. Mary tries to be rooted not only with her feet, but with her entire legs. So almost the entire body is resting in a sense. So this shows the deep rootedness. And here, Martha's rootedness is purposely avoided in the painting because Martha didn't have any constant root, in the sense any continuous route here. So one here, now she'll be standing here, then she'll be standing here, now then she'll go and stand there, then she may go and stand. So constantly her feet were moving, which means constantly her roots were moving. So what does it mean to say? It means to say the more relaxed you are, the more rooted you are. The more distracted you are, the less rooted you are. And that is the meaning of the story, where Jesus identifies or proposes that the real rootedness is to be rooted in God. And Martha has her feet in many places, many roots she tries to have, and she is not able to concentrate, and that leads to distractions. So that's the second dimension of the story, the picture. So first one we analyzed, the serving dimension. That is, she has her elements here, jar and fruit basket, and she stands taller than Jesus. That is serving. She is serving, Martha is serving, and Mary is being served. That is one dimension. Second dimension we saw the rootedness. So Mary is rooted with her entire legs, not only with her feet. Jesus' rootedness is here, but Martha's rootedness is not seen in the picture, which means she was not really rooted. Now, with this background to the picture, we try to understand the story. The cultural context of the story. So we'll understand first what is the cultural context, what is the theological context, and what is the literary context. In a cultural context, whenever a person is invited for a dinner, as we saw yesterday in Samson narrative, whenever there is a dinner, either at home or in a matrimonial context, a wedding feast, there will be two types of hospitality, like hospitality of food and hospitality of word. Even now we have here, suppose we have a wealthy person's wedding, and usually what they do, there is on one side they have food, on the other side they have some fun games, or they have some instrumental orchestra or some type of exhibition they have. Like all means the people who come there are satisfied both internally, in the sense both their stomachs are filled and their eyes are full. So in the Palestinian context, whenever somebody invites somebody else for a food, usually what they will do, first the host is somebody who invites somebody, then the guest comes, and the host and the guest. So host will be giving number one food, then number two word, in the sense they will be interacting, they will be talking. So there will be necessarily appointed some persons to tell fables, to tell stories, to tell riddles. And that's the context in which Jesus also tells a riddle to the Pharisee. And in yesterday's story in the book of Judges, we saw how Samson places a riddle in front of others. So it all happens in a hospitality context. So from cultural context, we can understand here, Martha was trying to be hospitable through food. Mary was trying to be hospitable through word. So both types of hospitality were there in Palestinian context. And here, culturally, these two hospitalities are represented in this Martha-Mary story. That is the cultural context. The theological context is, early church had this problem of contemplation and action. In the sense, what is necessary? Like we have in Paul and we have in James. Paul is telling that faith alone is enough, because works, especially when they are inspired by the law, they are bad. But for James, it was necessary that faith without work is dead. So already there is a contrast between two theologies. As far as Paul is concerned, Paul is telling what is necessary is faith. But for James, faith and the works both are necessary. In the same way, there was a problem, like some were telling contemplation. Contemplation in the sense you believe in a doctrine or you get baptized and that is enough for you, that you will be saved. And other group were, they were telling it's not necessary that we believe in Christian faith or we are baptized. Something more has to be done. We have to involve in political activities, or we have to involve in social activities, and we have to involve in the upliftment of the poor. So they were telling that the action is necessary. So now The early gospel writers had to handle this problem in the sense what is more necessary, contemplation or action? To just sit at the feet of the Lord or to work? And here, actually, we have two persons here, Mary and Martha. Martha is representing action and Mary is representing contemplation. And from the, as far as the story is concerned, the story in a way elevates contemplation or elevates to a level higher than action. That is a theological context. The third context is literary context, where this particular story is placed in the Gospel of Luke. So we have the story only in the Gospel of Luke, and in the context of Jesus explaining about love of God and love of neighbor. So a scribe comes to Jesus and he asks, like, what I have to do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus places before him love of God and love of neighbor. And finally he tells, you go and do likewise, you will live. And the person is asking now, who is my neighbor? That's another question come. And for that, Luke gives the parable of the Good Samaritan. So now, how Luke arranges the entire episode. First one, love of God. That is the commandment. Then second commandment, love of neighbor. Then, after placing these two commandments, Luke begins with a story. Story to explain love of neighbor, then story to explain love of God. So Good Samaritan story explains to us what does it mean to love our neighbor. And Martha's story helps us to understand what is the meaning of love of neighbor. So the literary context is very simple. So Luke is placing in such a way, first he gives the commandments, love of God, love of neighbor. Then he reverses it. He reverses through the stories by first placing it love of neighbor, Good Samaritan, then Martha, Mary story. So what Luke wants to convey to us, like, though commandments, by commandments, the order is love of God and love of neighbor. As far as life is concerned, love of neighbor should come first and love of God should come afterwards. But how Luke concludes the story, he concludes the episode with in a Latin, Jerome beautifully translates is unum necessarium, like one thing that is necessary, that is love of God. So Luke begins with love of God and ends with love of God. That is the type of inclusio, or that's the type of sandwich technique he follows, and that is the literary context of the story. Now, why do we take this story? Number one, today we have too many distractions in our work, in our ministry. Earlier, our works were very limited. Like we are today, we have to do many things. Suppose we are a superior of a community. You are a superior of a community means you have to take care of the prayer life of the community. You have to take care of the health care of the community. Then you have to take care of the education of the community, ongoing formation, different activities, all the functions, the day-to-day running. So everything the one person has to do. So that is, we have too many distractions in our work. Like whether to concentrate my life as a minister or as a teacher in the school, or will I concentrate my life as a healthcare assistant to somebody who is sick. So throughout the day, we have been constantly running after many errands. So many distractions are there. Suppose we are a parish priest, again same. So we have to say mass, we have to attend to a funeral, we have to write banns for a marriage, then we have to pay electricity bills, and we have to take care of the maintenance of the house. So one day, one person, but many roles. So we have to constantly play many roles in our communities, and many roles means many distractions. Then secondly, there is a constant rising in complaining about our ministry. Earlier, we used to complain only about our life, in the sense that our life is this way and it's not satisfied with it. But now, the recent studies, especially conducted by the CCBA Commission for Vocation and Clergy, they have brought out a document 2 years before where the complaining about ministry is constantly on the rise. Why do we complain? Because of the problem which is the next, that is, we compare with others. For example, I do a particular ministry. I am an assistant parish priest, but my own companion is sent for maybe studies somewhere. So I compare myself with that person. and I compare my ministry with that person's ministry. So my ministry is to work with the parish, his ministry is studies. So both are completely different. So what I do in order to compensate for that, like I have been sent for studies like my companion, I try to own a curriculum. Maybe I undertake a correspondence course or an online course and I try to do. What happens is I have now too many distractions already. Now, one side I have to do my pastoral ministry, other side I have to take care of my studies. But for that person, on my companion, it's not the case. It's only for studies. So when I compare with others, when I complain about my ministry, then naturally distractions increase. Then the fourth one, we always have problem in choosing the right path. So life is very difficult when it comes to discernment, and discerning between good and bad is very easy. For example, two things are there. One is good, one is bad. Suppose I say, afternoon, I want to sleep, but I also have to take class. So here, one thing is bad, one thing is good. Suppose we say that we can say both are good, but here, maybe sleeping is bad because if I sleep, I will be insensitive to all the people who have enrolled for this class or the seminarians who are waiting for me there. So that way, I do away with my sleeping, then I choose one thing. So I do away with the wrong part, then choose the right part. Suppose we have two things and both are good. For example, taking a class also is good, and going out and helping a person who is in need. Suppose somebody is sick in the community now, and after lunch he fell sick. Now I have to take him to the hospital. So one right thing is to take class. Another right thing is to accompany that person to the hospital. So now among these two right things, which one I have to choose? So in that process, there is always a failure in the sense it depends on the principle which I value. Suppose I value my classes higher than going to hospital, I will choose the class. Suppose I value human life more than the classes, I will go further. So either way, I have to make a compromise. And often in discernment, when there are two right things in front of us, that gives us problem in discernment. And both are right here. What Mary did also was right. What Martha did also was right. Now how to choose the right path? That is the thing we have problem. Then busy serving others. So today, oftentimes we are caught up in the busyness of serving others. Like constantly we serve others. From morning to evening, we attend to different people, different issues, and we are constantly on wheels, busy serving others. But the question is, are we really served by God? And finally, the question of rootedness. Rootedness is the spirituality of place. Openness is the spirituality of time. We'll explain that shortly. So spirituality of place in the sense where I am rooted, where I am placed. In our dioceses or in our congregations, whenever somebody does not do well, or somebody has a problem, or somebody disobeys, what happens? The punishment usually given is that the person is not given any ministry. And that disturbs us because one side work is important because work also is our identity, like our home is an identity. But here the second thing that disturbs us is that our roots are cut off. Our roots are, suppose I am placed in a seminary, my roots are there. And suppose I am placed in a parish, my roots are there. Suppose I am a superior of a community, my roots are there. I am a teacher in a school, my roots are there. And when these roots are uprooted, saying that this year you will not have any work, which means we have no root, and that lack of root always disturbs us and we are not able to take it. And even look at our own parents or grandparents, when they are elder, they are not able to come out of the village, even though the village may not have any facility at all in terms of healthcare or transport. Still, they want to cling on to that. Why do they want to cling on to that? Because they feel their roots are there. So the rootedness is very important for a human being, and we'll understand how rootedness affects us from our own initial days. Number one, the first experience of humanity. In Genesis 2:15, we have the Lord took the man, that is Adam, and put him in the Garden of Eden. So here, for the first time, humanity experiences rootedness. And that rootedness is given by God, and the man enjoys it. But after eating the forbidden fruit, what happens? They transfer their roots. In a sense, the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord. So earlier, God placed man and later woman in a particular place. But after the fall, they try to run away and hide. So suppose I stand here, then I run. When I run, what happens? My roots, my feet are in different places. Means I transfer my feet, I transfer my roots, and same thing happens here. And after the fall, the end result is they are uprooted because God sends them out. God sends man and woman out of the garden. So humanity first experienced rootedness through creation, and rootedness came as a gift from God. But because of our sin, we lost that rootedness, and since then we have been running to identify that as our root. That is our constant urge, because first experience of humanity was rootedness, and that rootedness is disturbed, we are naturally disturbed. And let's go to the second episode in Cain. Cain is telling God that Cain kills Abel, and Cain is being questioned by God, and Cain is inflicted with the punishment. So after being inflicted, Cain is telling God, today you have driven me away from the soil, and I shall be hidden from your face. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and anyone who meets me may kill me. Look here, I shall be hidden from your face. So yesterday we saw this particular statement in a different view, in the sense Hagar experiences God as somebody who sees her constantly. So here Cain also more or less feels that when we are hidden from God's face, we have actually no existence. So the Hebrew Bible has this understanding, more or like it's our cultural understanding as well. And our concern is here, you have driven me away from the soil. So Cain had roots in his own place. Now God is sending him out. What would happen if he becomes a wanderer? Wanderer means without any root. Anyone who meets me may kill me. That is why we say home is very important. So maybe the home where we were born, our village, or the ministry place, that is our home. And when there is no home, when we become a wanderer, what happens? We become more vulnerable. So once when we lose our rootedness, we become more vulnerable. And Cain's fear was this. Then we have the example of Hagar. Abraham sent Hagar away, and she departed and wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. So here Hagar actually loses her roots from Abraham's family and continues to search for her roots. And finally she finds through the help of God. And God helps her being rooted again. So the first experience of humanity and the experience of Cain, they show that we all need our roots. And coming to Abraham, our father in faith, the first patriarch, here Abraham somehow wanted to be rooted in the promised land. So the first buying happens here. We have in Genesis 23:20, very beautiful scene. Here Abraham is a very rich man, but he does not own any place. He has many cattle, many servants, even many houses. Maybe the land might have been for lease. And somehow he has very good property, and people respect him. Means all the Gentiles, means the so-called the real originators of the place, and they appreciate him and they enjoy his presence. But one thing they reserve, that is land. They don't give land to him. And in earlier culture, it was the land was very, very, very close to their hearts. Even now, if we know our own parents, our own grandparents, they won't lose the family inheritance because land is their identity. And somehow the land they are not giving to Abraham. So now Sarah dies. And they want to bury, and Abraham wants to bury her. And is asking for a piece of land. So people are telling, you have been here, so what's the problem? You can bury her anywhere. But Abraham insists that he buys the land, because once you buy the land, then that becomes your property, and there you can be rooted, because nobody will send you away once you have paid the price for that. And here, very beautiful statement of the first possession of promised land here. The field and the cave that is in it passed from the Hittites into Abraham's possession as a burying place. So the first ever plot bought in the history of promised land, history of salvation, is a burying place. Again, this is something beautiful to say. They said, this is our final root. In the sense, we start our root from our mother's womb, but end our roots here in a burying place. And I think this is the ideal rootedness that we all strive to achieve. And in the process, we undergo many different rootedness experiences. And Abraham finds this place for Sarah. And from here, we are able to understand how rootedness was important for Abraham. Coming to Jesus, Jesus' rootedness was in God, because he was always very clear, the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. And we have Jesus' rootedness is only in God. We have different examples here. After saying farewell to them, Jesus went up on the mountain to pray. So through prayer, Jesus experienced his rootedness. Then when Jesus was praying alone, again another instance, then he appointed 12 to be with him. And here, to be with him in the sense, Jesus also invites his disciples to have their roots in him. And we have this similar expression in a different metaphor, the vine and the branches. There also, it's actually a metaphor of rootedness, like whether we are rooted in God or rooted in Christ. Now, with humanity, that is our Adam and Eve, with Cain, with Abraham, with Jesus, we are trying to identify different roots. For Adam, root was Eden. For Cain, root was his father's house. For Abraham, root was the promised land. And for Jesus, root was God. So from here we understand our rootedness could be in a place, or could be in a person, or could be in God. Now let's come to the story. And before going to see the rootedness in the story, let us understand this as a metaphor for our religious life. So oftentimes when I give a wedding homily, I use this particular text to explain two types of wedding: Martha wedding and Mary wedding. And we can use this as also to say Martha way of religious life and Mary way of religious life, or Martha way of priesthood or Mary way of priesthood. How do we justify this? Earlier I said, in the Holy Land, the house of Mary and Martha is only 10 into 10 feet. And in the 10 into 10 feet, suppose you were to talk, you will talk very, like it's enough that if I talk just casually, I need not shout. But here in the gospel reading, if we read, Martha, Martha, Jesus is telling, Lord, Lord, Martha is telling. But here, why Luke has to write twice? Maybe one reason they say to draw attention. So to draw attention, to give emphasis, they give always double. Martha, Martha, Mary, Mary, Lord, Lord. But the other dimension, the psychological understanding, how we can place it. Once Vivekananda was asked, Swami Vivekananda was asked, like when two people are fighting, they are shouting at each other in a high tone. But two are there sitting in a garden and they are in love with one another. They just whisper to one another and they are able to hear. How? And Vivekananda seemed to have explained, when you are in love, your hearts are together. So it is enough that you talk very light and the other person will be able to hear. But when you are in anger or when you are in hatred, your hearts are apart from each other, even though you stand close to each other. Therefore, to reach the other person's ear or the other person's heart, you have to constantly shout. And that's why in fight, there is shouting. In love, there is no shouting. Vivekananda explained. Suppose we apply the same here. Martha and Mary, instance, Mary's heart was very close to Jesus and no words were expressed between them. But Martha and Jesus, though they were together, they were standing near physically, Their hearts were apart. In the sense, Martha's heart was apart because of the distractions, and on account of this, they had to constantly shout to each other, Martha, Martha, Lord, Lord. And in a Martha priesthood, Martha religious life, there is too much noise. That is number one. Then number two, too many distractions. Too many distractions in the sense we want to be this way, we want to be that way, and we want to prove this one, prove that one. That is too many distractions. And then there is too deep loneliness. Here it's very surprising. Mary is sitting maybe just 3 feet away from Martha, but still Martha is telling, I am lonely, I feel alone. So that is the experience of Martha. So in the first part of our religious life or priestly life, maybe till we reach our jubilee, we often live through our mind. And the second part, we live through our heart. And then when we live through our mind, what happens? There is too much noise, there are too many distractions, and there is too much loneliness. But when you begin to live from your heart, then noise is reduced. We don't try to prove to each other, or we don't try to outshine each other. Just we accept the way we are. Suppose the same thing is applied to marital right. We can say in Martha type of wedding, there will be too much noise, like you talk, he talks, she talks, and everyone else listens. There are too many distractions, too much loneliness. But in Mary's type of wedding, like husband sits at the feet of the wife, and the wife sits at the feet of the husband, and both of them sit at the feet of the Lord, and there is serenity and there is peace. And that is an ideal marriage we can arrive at as far as the marital life is concerned. But our religious or priest life is concerned, I think we need to move from this Martha distractions to Mary's serenity. Now, the second part of our conference is, now let us analyze our lives. Let's think for a while, where are we rooted now? Stephen Covey, in his book, 7 Habits for Highly Effective People, he gives this beautiful insight, like we can have different roots here. So number one, I can be rooted in a place. Suppose I am coming from Madurai Archdiocese, and my roots are in Madurai. So suppose if I am rooted in Madurai, what will happen? If I go out of Madurai, I will feel out of place. I will always try to return to Madurai. That is being rooted in a place. Some people will be rooted in persons. Like suppose I am in a community and I get a close friend in the community, and that particular person is transferred from the community, I feel disturbed. Or if I am transferred from that community, I feel disturbed because I have my roots in the person. I have become attached to that person. So I am not able to cut away my root from this person. And that root is being cut, then I feel disturbed. That could be the second possible root. The third root is our family. Family in the sense, family is fine because unless and otherwise I remember my family, in the sense, in terms of my rootedness, I will forget my roots and I will be very superficial. So once I remember my family, the way I came from there, or the humble beginnings I had, naturally it affects my life, and I tend to be more compassionate, more loving, and more merciful to each other in my dealing. And that way it is good. But for a religious person or for a priest, when we are attached to our family too much, or when we have a rootedness here in the family, what would happen? I would be focusing on my ministry from this perspective, because some priests are there, like their parish council discussions will be influenced by their father or mother or brothers or sisters. That's not correct, because you are a priest and you are out of the family and you are running a parish here. Now, once you run a parish here, you have your rootedness here, not here. But suppose I am here, but still I have my roots here. What will happen? I will try to be influenced by the family. So that is the negative part, but positively having our roots is fine there. Then rootedness to an event. Event in the sense, suppose some priest is there and the priest is obtaining a doctoral degree. And the doctoral degree was so exciting, and that particular defense day was very exciting, and many people came to wish him. and he felt very great. And what happens? He gets rooted to that event, that doctoral dissertation or doctoral degree being awarded. And if the person is fixed here, what would happen? Either he will try to continue to study more, because that person thinks that the more degrees I get, the more such type of events will be there, so the more I will be happy. And that way, I will be clinging only onto the event. So that is rootedness in an event. Then rootedness can happen in a process, or I may be rooted to a process, in the sense I was in the seminary, maybe doing my theology. I'm there in the seminary for 4 years of theology. That is a process of my formation, my human formation, my intellectual formation, my pastoral formation, and my emotional formation. There what happens? That's in a process. So what I do, I am out of the seminary, I am ordained a priest, or I have become a nun. Then I am out of the process. Like when I was in the formation house as a novice or as a postulant or as an aspirant, that was in a process. But some people, like we are out of the formation house, but still we'll be clinging onto the process, in the sense, oh, it would be nice if we were in the seminary, if we were in the formation house, how we enjoyed together, how we played together, how we had recreation together. But now see, we are all alone, we are all sitting here. So that is the rootedness in the process. Like we are not able to get rid of it. And we may have rootedness in our God. But the problem Stephen Covey tells is, our God experience always changes. For example, today I may have a very good positive God experience, like our Saint Ignatius of Loyola tells that one day I will feel consolation and the other day I will feel desolation. And consolation, when I feel consoled, when I feel very happy with God, like things will be fine. But there also will be moments of occasional crisis, faith crisis, where I will have the desolation moment. And that time, what will happen? My roots will be disturbed. So the ideal Stephen Covey proposes is that we are rooted on a principle. So here, these two roots are very good. Like we are rooted in God, okay? But sometimes our God experience undergoes change. So the ideal thing is to be rooted in a principle. So what does it mean to be rooted in a principle? Principles are universally valid, universally true. Like H2O. Water is H2O. Integrity is everywhere integrity. Honesty is everywhere honesty. Service is everywhere service. Serenity is everywhere serenity. So there is no change of definition. Like integrity is different in India, integrity is different in Italy. No. Integrity is same. Integrity is what? That you are true to your own self. Like you are connected to your own self. There is no disconnection. There is no alienation. And suppose we are rooted in the principles. Wherever we are happy. So that way, the ideal root is here. So Mary found Jesus as the principle of life. So not necessarily as a God, but as a principle of life in a sense. Mary clinged on to Jesus' word. And that's why the gospel writer says, Mary was sitting at the feet of the cross and was listening and was hearing. So that faith comes by hearing, and that hearing is the principle here. So today we need to ask, maybe in our own reflection, we can see, where do I get rooted? Do I get rooted in the place, maybe in a particular place, with a particular person, or with my own family and friends, an event, with a process, or in God and principle? God is ideal, but this ideal gets disturbed often, so we may always cling on to a principle. Now, how do we strengthen our roots? So having identified, suppose my strength is, so my root is in God, or how do I identify it? My root is in a principle, how do I identify it? These three we can use. Number one, solitude. Solitude in the sense, Mary experiences solitude, Martha experiences loneliness. Both are same in the sense, in both cases, a person is alone. Martha is alone, Mary is alone. But Martha has the experience of loneliness, Mary has the experience of solitude. So I can be alone, I can feel lonely, or I can be in solitude. So what is the meaning? Solitude is positive in the sense, In solitude only, I can realize where I am rooted concretely. Oftentimes, we are attached to people, we are going after them, we are talking to them, and that way we tend to get our roots attached to them. But in the solitude, when I am in my room alone, in my prayer, I try to understand myself. What is life after all? So, where am I really rooted? That is the solitude. Secondly, serenity. Martha had too many voices or noises, low, no serenity, no, in the sense, no internal peace. So serenity is internal, silence is external. So suppose I can be a silent person, in the sense I'm not talking now, that is silence. But I may not be a serene person. Serene person means my thinking will be going on inside, or I may be disturbed inside. So serenity is inner silence, and silence is verifiable outer silence. So the second way we can enrich or strengthen our root is through our serenity. Serenity means it's like calming down the projectors. Suppose we have 100 projectors in a room, all the 100 projectors are projected towards wall, and we will not get any good image at all. So what do? We turn off projector by projector, one by one, one by one, one by one. Then comes serenity. And Jesus was in fact trying to put Martha's projector into order, like turn off one, turn off another, and come down to serenity. And final one, silence. Oftentimes, the world today, we are surrounded by noises from phones, noises from videos everywhere. But the other side, we have many words, in the sense we don't talk outside, but we are talking. Like when we read a meme, or when we are bombarded with different messages from different people, our silence is lost. But when we are really silent, that when we go to that silence, ultimately we realize our rootedness. That concludes our reflection. And this was in fact taking Martha to solitude, serenity, and silence. And Mary had it already: solitude, serenity, and silence. So that way, once we obtain inner freedom, then we move towards, or we work on our rootedness, and we work on our rootedness on account of these three virtues. Thank you.